The discovery of the hidden presence of God within is perhaps the most profound realization anyone can experience, and yet it is so simple that it is often overlooked. For most people, faith is something they look for outside themselves in religious rituals, in the approval of others, or in circumstances that seem to validate belief. But the deeper truth is that the divine presence is not somewhere out there, waiting to be found. It is already here, right where you are, in the very center of your being. To truly understand this is to realize that everything you have ever sought externally, peace, guidance, strength, and understanding, has already been given to you, because God is not distant or separate, but fully alive within you. It is not a concept to be grasped intellectually, but an awareness to be awakened. The moment you stop searching outwardly and turn your attention inward, a new dimension of reality opens. You begin to feel a subtle yet undeniable presence that underlies all thought and feeling, a presence that is infinitely more powerful than any fear or doubt. This is the essence of faith, knowing that no circumstance, no external trial can diminish the life of God within you. Many spend their lives chasing signs, waiting for confirmations, or trying to perform spiritually in order to attract divine favor, not realizing that such efforts are unnecessary. The divine does not need to be earned or negotiated, it simply is, and it is already yours. The key is awareness. When you quiet your mind and open your consciousness to this inner presence, you start to perceive a reality that is beyond the fluctuations of the physical world. Thoughts of lack, limitation, or fear no longer have the same hold over you because you recognize that they are not the ultimate truth. The true life you are seeking is the life of God within, ever-present, unshakable, and free from the rise and fall of events around you. As this awareness grows, you begin to live differently. You speak differently, act differently, and even see the world differently, because you are no longer a person trying to make life work through struggle. Instead, you are a living expression of the divine, a consciousness that moves naturally with the flow of spiritual law. You understand that peace is not something to wait for, joy is not something to chase, and faith is not something to manufacture. All these qualities arise naturally from being in touch with the God that is already within you. This discovery shakes faith in the conventional sense, because it tells you that you have never needed to prove yourself, never needed to rely on outward validation, and never needed to perform to earn God's presence. All that is required is your recognition, your quiet attention, and your willingness to let the inner light guide your life. When you truly awaken to this hidden presence, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, the mundane is transformed, and your life begins to reflect a peace and power that cannot be explained by human understanding. Faith is often misunderstood as something we must chase, fight for, or even manufacture through effort and discipline. Many have been taught that faith is a struggle, a test of willpower, or a reward for perseverance. Yet the deeper truth is that faith is not something outside of us to be earned. It is an awareness, a recognition of the divine reality that is already present in every moment of our lives. When we truly understand this, everything about our spiritual journey changes, because faith ceases to be about striving and becomes about knowing. Struggle and striving create tension, and tension clouds perception. When we attempt to force faith, we are in fact denying the very presence that faith is meant to reveal. Real faith arises naturally when we stop trying to manufacture it and instead turn our attention inward to the reality of God already present within us. This is not a theoretical idea, it is an experiential truth. The moment we recognize that God is the source and substance of all that we are, that every thought, feeling, and circumstance is encompassed by divine life, faith ceases to be fragile or conditional. It becomes an intimate knowing, a lived experience that cannot be shaken by external events. People often confuse faith with belief in a set of doctrines or with hope in outcomes. True faith is deeper, more personal, and infinitely more powerful. It is the recognition that God is not something separate from us to be reached or persuaded, but the very essence of our being. When we live from this awareness, the world shifts. Challenges no longer intimidate because we are no longer measuring our life against circumstances, we are measuring it against the eternal presence within us. The quiet realization that faith is an inner awareness transforms our perception of life itself. We stop resisting what is and stop trying to control outcomes, because we know that the divine intelligence that created all things is already guiding every step. There is no need for fear, no need for doubt, no need for relentless seeking outside ourselves, because faith is already alive as the silent assurance of God within. And as this awareness grows, it naturally expresses itself outwardly. Decisions are made with clarity. Actions are performed with confidence, and speech flows with truth, because we are no longer separated from the source of all wisdom and strength. Faith, then, is not a state to attain but a consciousness to awaken to, a recognition of the eternal presence that has always been within us. The moment we stop struggling for faith and simply rest in this knowing, our life begins to demonstrate a peace and confidence that cannot be shaken by the changing circumstances of the world. It is in this inner awareness, free from effort or striving, that faith becomes the unmovable foundation of a life lived in union with the divine. Life has a way of presenting itself in forms that seem real, urgent, and often threatening. Challenges arise, losses occur, situations appear out of control, and the mind quickly concludes that something must be wrong. It is in these moments that most people feel their faith falter, because faith has often been misunderstood as dependent upon circumstances lining up in a particular way. Yet the truth is that circumstances are never the measure of divine reality. They are temporary, shifting reflections on the surface of life, but they cannot alter the unchanging presence of God within. When we realize that the divine is constant, omnipresent, and fully alive within every situation, the appearance of difficulty no longer holds power over us. Faith becomes not a fragile hope in a better outcome, but an inner assurance that God's presence is unshaken by appearances. The illusion of circumstances lies in mistaking the visible world for the ultimate reality. When we look at the waves, the storm, the seemingly insurmountable problem, and allow ourselves to equate these with our spiritual truth, we invite fear, doubt, and anxiety. But the moment we turn our focus inward, to the inner life where God dwells, we discover that nothing external can diminish that life. The world of form is constantly changing, people behave unpredictably, events unfold beyond our control, and plans often collapse. But the divine presence within us is eternally stable. It is this awareness that frees faith from being conditional upon what happens outside. Understanding this transforms every moment into an opportunity to witness the constancy of God, rather than a test of belief. We begin to see that problems are not obstacles to faith but invitations to recognize the life that cannot be shaken. When we are no longer governed by appearances, we are no longer at the mercy of circumstance. Decisions become clear because we operate from the inner guidance that is unaffected by surface-level chaos. Peace replaces fear, clarity replaces confusion, and confidence replaces doubt. Even in the most turbulent situations we can stand with an unshakable knowing that the divine reality within us is perfect, complete, and fully sufficient. This does not mean we ignore challenges or deny the external world. It means we no longer allow it to dictate our spiritual state. Life's experiences become the canvas upon which the inner presence expresses itself, rather than the measure by which we evaluate our worth or the validity of our faith. As this understanding deepens, the apparent power of circumstances dissolves. Faith is no longer a fragile thread to be tested by events, but a living awareness of God's constancy that illuminates and guides every moment. Once this discovery is made, the believer begins to experience a freedom and serenity that cannot be disturbed by any external condition, for the inner life, anchored in divine presence, is the true reality, eternal, unchanging, and wholly secure. The need to control life is one of the greatest obstacles to spiritual awakening, and yet it is so deeply ingrained that most do not even realize it. From the earliest moments the mind learns to grasp, to plan, to manipulate outcomes in an effort to feel safe, secure, and in command. We develop the illusion that happiness, success, and even spiritual progress depend upon our ability to control events, people, and circumstances. Yet the truth is that control is an illusion, and the moment we release it, faith begins to flourish naturally. When we understand that God's wisdom is infinite, and that the divine presence within is guiding every thought, word, and action, the compulsion to manipulate life falls away. Letting go of control does not mean inaction or passivity. It means a conscious surrender to the intelligence that underlies all things. Every attempt to force outcomes, to push against life, or to insist on a particular path is an effort to replace divine guidance with human effort, and it inevitably leads to frustration, doubt, and spiritual fatigue. Faith, in its truest sense, is the recognition that we are not separate from God, that every aspect of life is already held in divine care, and that our role is not to control but to align, to cooperate, and to flow with this eternal intelligence. The moment we stop struggling, the currents of life begin to carry us with ease. Decisions are no longer made from fear or the need to secure a specific result, but from an inner sense of what is true, what is right, and what reflects the divine order. This letting go is not a single event but a continual practice, an ongoing awareness that every moment can be surrendered to the wisdom of God within. It is in this surrender that faith matures, for faith is not a fragile hope tethered to our efforts but a living awareness of guidance, provision, and presence. Once the illusion of control is released, life begins to reflect a natural harmony. Even in the midst of challenges, we act with clarity and confidence because we are no longer trying to hold the universe in our hands. Instead, we are moving as a conscious expression of the divine, flowing with the intelligence that sustains all things. The release of control also transforms the way we relate to others, for we no longer impose expectations, judgments, or pressures in an attempt to steer outcomes. compassion, patience, and understanding arise naturally as the inner guidance informs our actions and interactions. In this state, faith is no longer tested by circumstance or outcome because it rests not on what we can manipulate but on the unshakable presence of God within. The world continues to change, plans may fail, and challenges may appear, yet we remain centered, calm, and aligned, because true faith is born from surrender, from letting go, and from trusting that the divine presence within is sufficient, perfect, and honoring. This understanding is liberating, transformative, and essential for a life fully lived in awareness of the eternal truth. In the midst of life's noise, distraction, and constant demands, the power of inner silence is the key that unlocks the deepest spiritual truths. Most people are so accustomed to filling their minds with thoughts, plans, worries, and opinions that they fail to recognize the still, subtle presence of God that is always within. This inner silence is not merely the absence of sound or activity, it is the quieting of the mental chatter that obscures awareness of the divine reality. When the mind stops racing, when the ego ceases its endless commentary, and when the heart is no longer pulled in conflicting directions, a space emerges in which God's presence can be perceived clearly. It is in this silence that faith is no longer theoretical but tangible, no longer fragile but strong because it arises from direct experience rather than belief alone. The power of inner silence allows us to listen deeply, not to external voices or human authority, but to the voice of God within, the still small voice that never misleads and never falters. In this sacred quiet, we come to understand that life is not a series of problems to solve but a continuous unfolding of divine expression. Challenges lose their power to shake us because we are anchored in an awareness that transcends appearances. The ordinary and the extraordinary are seen not as separate, but as expressions of the same divine life, and this awareness brings peace that the mind cannot manufacture. Inner silence also cultivates clarity. When the noise of the world and the mind is stilled, the answers to questions that once seemed perplexing become obvious, and decisions that once felt heavy now arise naturally. It is in this space that intuition, inspiration, and understanding flow freely, because the barriers erected by overthinking and fear have been removed. Many struggle with faith because they are constantly seeking outward signs, proofs, or validations. Inner silence reveals that these external confirmations are unnecessary, for the presence of God within is sufficient, complete, and always available. In silence, we realize that our true life is not in doing, achieving, or proving ourselves, but in being aware of the divine life already present. Meditation, contemplation, and quiet reflection are not ends in themselves but means to cultivate this awareness, to create a sanctuary within where faith is not tested by the turmoil of the world. As this practice deepens, we begin to live differently. Actions flow from a place of calm certainty, words are spoken with integrity, and relationships are approached with patience and compassion. Faith becomes an ever-present companion, not because we have studied it, prayed for it, or fought to maintain it, but because it is born from direct communion with the eternal presence within. This discovery is transformative, for it shifts faith from something abstract to something immediate, real, and alive, experienced in every heartbeat, every breath, and every thought that is surrendered to the sacred quiet. Faith, in its truest and most transformative sense, is not a set of doctrines, rules, or beliefs to be memorized and repeated. It is not something to be measured by outward conformity, ritual, or intellectual understanding. True faith is a living experience, a conscious awareness of the divine presence within that informs, guides, and sustains every aspect of life. Many spend their lives adhering to teachings, collecting knowledge, and striving to follow spiritual practices, believing that faith is something external that must be acquired. Yet the discovery that faith is alive within changes everything. When faith is understood as a living experience, it is not fragile or conditional, it is unshakable because it is based on reality itself rather than on appearances, circumstances, or human effort. This kind of faith arises naturally when one awakens to the recognition that God, the source of all life, is not separate from us, but is the very essence of our being. It is an inner certainty that cannot be negated by doubt, fear, or external events. Living faith transforms perception. Life is no longer a series of trials or challenges to be endured, but a continuous unfolding of divine presence. Decisions are made from a place of inner knowing rather than speculation, actions flow with natural wisdom rather than forced effort, and the heart experiences peace that is not dependent on circumstances. Doctrine can instruct, inspire, and guide, but it can never substitute for the immediate, living experience of faith. Belief in ideas is temporary and susceptible to questioning, but faith rooted in the awareness of God within is constant and alive in every moment. This living faith is not passive. It expresses itself in daily life through understanding, patience, compassion, and creativity. It is felt as a quiet assurance that no matter what occurs externally, the inner presence of God is sufficient to meet every need and guide every step. The awakening to faith as a living experience also dissolves fear of judgment, failure, or loss, because one realizes that life is continuously upheld by the divine presence that is within. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to witness the reality of that presence, and every moment becomes a moment of grace. As this understanding deepens, faith ceases to be something one does or tries to maintain, and instead becomes the natural state of consciousness. It informs every thought, word, and action, transforming ordinary existence into a reflection of divine life. This is the ultimate realization. Faith is not a concept, not a hope, and not a belief in something outside of ourselves. It is the conscious awareness of God alive within, the living reality that animates every breath and sustains every heartbeat. Once this is understood, faith is no longer something to be questioned or owned. It is simply known, experienced, and lived, transforming life into a continuous expression of the divine. As we draw all of these truths together, it becomes clear that the discovery we have been exploring is not merely an idea to contemplate, but a living reality to be experienced. The essence of faith, the awakening to the divine presence within, the recognition that God is not distant but already here in every heartbeat, every thought, and every circumstance. This is the revelation that can transform life in ways nothing else can. When we stop looking outside ourselves for validation, guidance, or proof, we begin to awaken to the inner reality that has always been present. The presence of God within is not conditional upon performance, understanding, or circumstance. It is constant, unshakable, and eternal. Once this truth is grasped, the illusions that once dominated life, fear, doubt, struggle, and the compulsion to control, begin to dissolve. We realize that nothing outside us can truly dictate our spiritual state because the source of life, wisdom, and strength is already alive within. Faith is no longer a fragile hope, something to be tested by circumstance or earned by effort. It becomes an inner certainty, a conscious awareness that guides every thought, word, and action. Circumstances, with all their challenges, become opportunities to witness the constancy of this divine presence, rather than measures of success or failure. Letting go of control, surrendering the illusion that we must manipulate outcomes to secure life's blessings, opens the door to a peace and confidence that is beyond human understanding. The mind, freed from the incessant noise of worry and striving, discovers a silence that is not empty but full of life. In that silence, the still small voice of God speaks with clarity, providing guidance, insight, and assurance that cannot be found elsewhere. As faith becomes a living experience rather than a collection of doctrines or beliefs, it transforms the way we engage with the world. Actions flow from wisdom, words are spoken from truth, and relationships are approached with patience and compassion. The ordinary is transformed not by effort, but by awareness of the divine presence animating every moment. In this realization, life itself becomes sacred, each moment a reflection of the eternal reality within. The fear of lack, the anxiety over change, the uncertainty of outcomes, all of these fade before the certainty of God's presence in every aspect of life. Faith is no longer something we try to hold on to, it is something we live, breathe, and embody. It is the inner life made manifest in every aspect of our being. When this discovery is fully embraced, it shakes the very foundations of what we thought faith was. We no longer measure it by outward signs, teachings, or achievements. Instead, we recognize it as the living awareness of God within, the eternal, unshakable presence that sustains, guides, and transforms. This is not a promise for someday, it is the truth available in this moment, waiting for recognition, awakening, and full embodiment. In the end, faith is not something to acquire, it is something to awaken to, and once awakened, it becomes the unmovable foundation of a life lived in harmony with the divine, radiant with peace, and overflowing with the certainty of God alive within.